The millionaire got out of the limousine and something stopped him in the street. The breathless cyclist who handed him the order was his ex-wife, pregnant, sweaty, and with eyes that carried an old secret. He fell to his knees when he realized that baby could be his. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you are watching us. We continue. Fabian Muller adjusted his silk Italian tie as he gazed out the panoramic window of his top-floor office at the capital. The city pulsed 40 stories below, a mass of concrete and glass that he had learned to master over the years. As CEO of Muller Enterprises, he was accustomed to being in control of everything, from billion-dollar mergers to the smallest detail of the minimalist decor that surrounded him. The platinum watch on his wrist read 2:30 p.m. A meeting with international investors awaited him in 20 minutes. Vanessa, his current partner and the company's CFO, was already in the conference room, preparing the presentation that could result in the largest acquisition in the company's history. "Mr. Muller, your car is ready," his assistant announced over the intercom. Fabian picked up his Italian leather briefcase and went down to the building's private garage. The driver was already waiting for him, with the door of the armored Mercedes-Benz open. The drive to the hotel where the meeting would take place would normally take only 15 minutes, but the traffic was especially chaotic on that summer afternoon. As the car slowly moved along Main Avenue, Fabian was answering emails on his latest smartphone. That was when a peculiar movement caught his attention. Between the cars, a delivery driver was pedaling with difficulty, carrying a thermal backpack on her back. The relentless sun caused beads of sweat to run down her face, partially covered by a helmet. Something about the figure disturbed him. The way she moved, the way she tilted her head slightly to the right, a gesture so familiar it made his heart race. When the cyclist stopped at the traffic light next to his car, Fabian felt the air rush from his lungs. It was Helena. His ex-wife, once a respected university professor of comparative literature, was now cycling exhausted under the scorching sun. But that wasn't the only thing that shocked him. Helena was visibly pregnant. The traffic light changed, and she continued on her way, disappearing between the cars. Fabian remained silent, his mind a storm of thoughts and memories. Memories of 9 years of marriage, of lazy Sunday mornings, of heated discussions about literature over dinner. It all came flooding back. "Is everything okay, sir?" the driver asked, noticing his discomfort in the rearview mirror. Fabian didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on the spot where Helena had disappeared. The last time he had seen her was 8 months ago, during the divorce hearing. She had been different then, her hair impeccably groomed, her posture proud, her eyes defiant. Now seeing her in this situation caused a fissure in his carefully constructed reality. His phone vibrated. It was a message from Vanessa. "The investors have arrived. Where are you?" Fabian stared at the screen, but the words seemed distant, insignificant. His mind was stuck on that image. Helena, pregnant, cycling under the merciless sun of the capital. How had she gotten into that situation? What had happened after the divorce? "Turn around," he ordered the driver. "Call Vanessa and tell her I had an emergency." The driver hesitated for a moment, but did as he was told. Fabian picked up his phone and started making calls. Within minutes, he had activated his network of contacts. He needed to find out what had happened to Helena in the last few months. As the car veered into the opposite direction, Fabian realized that something bigger than he had imagined was at play. The image of Helena as pregnant and vulnerable did not match the strong, independent woman he had known. There were missing pieces to the puzzle, and he was determined to find them. What Fabian didn't know was that that chance encounter on the capital's busiest avenue would be just the first chapter of a story that would forever change not only his life, but the lives of everyone around him. The truth, when it finally came to light, would be more surprising than any script he could have imagined. The next morning, Fabian couldn't concentrate on his usual routine. Images from the previous day haunted him. Helena, her prominent belly, the sweat dripping down her face as she pedaled between cars. Sitting in his office, he sifted through old photos on his laptop, comparing the elegant, confident woman he had once known with the vulnerable figure he had seen on the avenue. "The reports from the meeting you missed yesterday," Vanessa said, walking in without knocking and placing a folder on his desk. Her tone was clipped, but Fabian barely noticed. He was too busy analyzing an email he'd just received from his private investigator. "Are you listening to me, Fabian?" Vanessa stepped closer, her heels clicking on the marble floor. The investors had been waiting for 2 hours. She was fired, Fabian muttered, more to himself than to Vanessa. "Helena was fired from the university 3 weeks after our divorce." Vanessa froze for an almost imperceptible moment before composing herself. "And that's relevant, because it doesn't make sense," Fabian continued, scanning the report. "Helena was one of the most respected professors in the department. She had a tenure track, international publications, academic awards." "People get replaced all the time," Vanessa replied, nervously adjusting the gold bracelet on her wrist. "That's just how the world works." But Fabian was not satisfied with simplistic explanations. He continued reading the report, and each new piece of information disturbed him more. After her dismissal, Helena had tried to get positions at other universities, but all the doors seemed mysteriously closed. Her references, once impeccable, now contained notes about inappropriate behavior and professional conduct issues. "It says here that she was accused of plagiarism in her last paper," Fabian said, frowning. "That's impossible. Helena was obsessed with academic ethics." Vanessa shrugged, but there was something in her posture that caught Fabian's attention, a subtle, almost imperceptible discomfort. "How is the research center project you are developing with the university going?" he asked, apparently changing the subject. "Progressing," Vanessa replied dryly. "Why?" "Curiosity," Fabian said, watching her closely. "You have a lot of contact with the dean's office, don't you?" Before Vanessa could respond, Fabian's assistant entered the room. "Mr. Muller, Professor Marcus Andreou is on the line. He says it's urgent." Fabian raised his eyebrows in surprise. Marcus had been Helena's greatest academic rival, known for his fierce criticism of her theories. What could he possibly want? "I'll take this in private," Fabian said, giving Vanessa a meaningful look, who left the room visibly upset. "Professor Marcus," Fabian began, "to what do I owe the honor?" "Mr. Muller," the professor's voice sounded strained, "I need to share something with you about your ex-wife, something I recently discovered that, well, let's just say it completely changed my perspective on certain events." Fabian felt his heart race. "I'm listening. I'd rather not discuss this over the phone. Can we meet?" "It's about the documents that supported her dismissal. There's something very wrong with this story." While making the appointment with Marcus, Fabian noticed Vanessa through the glass of his office, talking nervously on the phone. For the first time, he began to question not only the events that led to Helena's current situation, but also his current partner's role in the whole story. What intrigued him most was Helena's pregnancy. According to his calculations, she should be approximately 7 months pregnant, which would coincide with— no, it couldn't be. Or could it? Fabian picked up his phone and started searching for a specific name in his old calls. He needed to speak to Sandra, the former secretary of the department where Helena taught. She always knew everything that went on behind the scenes at the university. As he dialed the number, an uneasy feeling grew in his chest. He had the feeling he was about to discover something that would completely change his understanding of the past few months, something that would not only explain Helena's current situation, but also reveal disturbing truths about people he thought he knew. Sandra was waiting for Fabian in a discreet coffee shop in the city center. At 65, the former secretary of the Comparative Literature Department carried with her 3 decades of university secrets. Her wrinkled hands played nervously with the coffee cup as she waited. "Thank you for having me, Sandra," Fabian said, sitting down across from her. The place was practically empty at that time of the afternoon, perfect for a private conversation. "I knew someone would come and ask these questions someday," she replied, adjusting her gold-rimmed glasses. "I just didn't expect it to be you." Sandra opened her old purse and took out a yellowed envelope. "I kept copies of everything. I knew it wasn't right what they were doing to Helena, but back then, Well, who would believe a secretary about to retire? Fabian carefully picked up the envelope. Inside he found printed emails, internal memos, and most surprisingly, a detailed log of Helena's computer accesses in the months leading up to her dismissal. Was someone monitoring her computer? He asked, feeling a wave of indignation rise. Not someone. Your current fiancé, Sandra replied, leaning forward. Vanessa started going to college months before your divorce. At first I thought it was for the research center project, but she spent too much time in the IT department. Fabian continued to examine the documents, his face growing more tense with each page. There were records of altered emails, modified documents, manipulated dates, a meticulous and professional sabotage. Why didn't you say anything before? Sandra took a sip of coffee before answering. I tried. I sent you an anonymous email, but I never got a response. Later I found out that Vanessa had access to your personal email server. The revelation hit Fabian like a punch. He remembered how Vanessa always seemed to know everything, anticipated his decisions, was always one step ahead. He had attributed it to her professional competence, but now, there's one more thing you need to know, Sandra continued, lowering her voice even further. The night before Helena was fired, she was in the office late, grading papers. Vanessa happened to be there. Fabian leaned forward, interested. And what happened? They talked for almost an hour. I couldn't hear everything, but Sandra hesitated, as if weighing her words. Vanessa said something about making sure Helena never came near you again, that she had bigger plans for the company, and that a college professor wouldn't fit in. Sandra's words brought back memories that Fabian had buried. The way Vanessa had subtly alienated him from his old friends, the way she had rearranged his schedule to keep him busy, the way she had gradually taken control over so many aspects of his personal and professional life. Did Helena try to find me after she was fired? He asked, fearing the answer. Several times, but her emails were blocked, her calls never got past the front desk. She even came in person once, but... Sandra stopped, her weathered face twitching at the memory. Vanessa intercepted her. In the lobby. She said if she kept coming to you, the plagiarism charges would turn into a lawsuit that would destroy any chance of her returning to academia. Fabian closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his own negligence. How had he not realized what was happening? How had he allowed Vanessa to manipulate his life so much? There's one more thing, Sandra said, pulling a final piece of paper from the envelope. I found this in the digital recycle bin on Helena's computer the day she was fired. It's a medical exam. Fabian took the paper with trembling hands. It was a positive pregnancy test, dated a week before the divorce hearing. The date matched perfectly. Last night, he murmured, remembering. Helena had gone to the apartment to get some belongings that were still there. They had talked, drank wine, reminisced, and then she found out she was pregnant soon after. Sandra confirmed. But when she tried to tell you... Vanessa intercepted, Fabian added, his voice thick with bitterness. At that moment, her phone vibrated. It was a message from Marcus Andreou, Helena's former academic rival. We need to talk urgently. I discovered something about your ex-wife that will change everything. She is not alone, as everyone thinks. Fabian put away the documents Sandra had given him and stood up, his mind processing all the revelations. The puzzle was beginning to come together, but there were still crucial pieces missing, and something told him that Marcus Andreou had some of them. Thank you, Sandra, for everything. The lady smiled sadly. Just promise me you'll do the right thing this time, Fabian. Helena deserves it. As he walked to his car, Fabian made a phone call. I need you to look into all of Vanessa's access to the company's servers over the past 12 months. And one more thing, find out about a podcast called Silenced Voices. I have a hunch we'll find something interesting there. Marcus Andreou adjusted his reading glasses as he sorted through a stack of documents on his desk in his college office. Outside, the campus was bustling with the usual start-of-semester activity, but his mind was focused on a discovery that had been nagging at him for weeks. Professor Marcus, his assistant's voice came over the intercom. Mr. Muller has arrived. Fabian entered the room, his impeccable suit contrasting with the academic simplicity of the room. Marcus gestured for him to sit down. "Do you know this podcast?" Marcus asked bluntly, turning his laptop so that Fabian could see the screen. On it, the page for a podcast called Silenced Voices was open. "I was just about to look him up," Fabian replied. "Why?" Marcus clicked on one of the episodes and turned up the volume. A digitally altered female voice filled the room. "Today, I'm going to tell you the story of a college professor whose career was destroyed by a corporate sabotage scheme. A story about how power and influence can silence inconvenient voices." Fabian felt his heart race. Even though it was distorted, there was something familiar about that voice. "This podcast has over 50,000 listeners per episode," Marcus continued. "It started 3 months ago and has already become a social media phenomenon. The host remains anonymous, but her stories are devastatingly real." "It's Helena," Fabian said, not as a question, but as a statement. Marcus nodded. "I found out last week. She's using the podcast to give a voice to other women who've been through similar situations. But there's more, Fabian. Much more." The professor opened a drawer and took out a USB flash drive. "A former employee of the IT department contacted me. He said he had information about how Helena's emails and files were hacked. Apparently Vanessa didn't act alone." "Like this?" "She had help inside the university, strategically positioned. People who facilitated access to servers, manipulated documents, created false records of misconduct. It was a sophisticated and expensive operation." Fabian picked up the flash drive, feeling its symbolic weight. "Why are you helping me, Marcus? You and Helena were academic rivals." Marcus took off his glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. "Because disagreeing with someone's ideas is a lot different than destroying their life. What they did to Helena, that's not academia, that's not business, that's calculated cruelty." At that moment, Fabian's cell phone vibrated. It was a message from his private investigator with a link. Vanessa was being mentioned in a report about secret negotiations for the sale of Muller Enterprises to an international group. "Is she trying to sell my company?" Fabian muttered in disbelief. "It's not just about the company," Marcus said, leaning forward. "It's about power, control. Helena posed a threat not because she was his ex-wife, but because she had always been her authentic self, her incorruptible self. Someone like that is dangerous to people like Vanessa." Fabian began playing another episode of the podcast. Helena's altered voice told the story of an executive who had been sabotaged by her own team after reporting financial irregularities. "Every story she tells on the podcast," Marcus began. "It's a piece of the puzzle," Fabian added. "She's building a case, documenting a pattern." "Exactly. And there's one more thing you need to know." Marcus hesitated for a moment. "Helena is not alone in this journey. After I discovered the truth, I began helping her. She's up to something big, Fabian. Something that will expose not only what happened to her, but an entire system of manipulation and silencing." Fabian stared out the office window, watching the students stream across campus. Somewhere in the city, Helena was pregnant, fighting not only for justice for herself, but for all the voices that had been silenced. "What does she intend to do?" he asked. "She's going to reveal everything," Marcus replied. "Soon she'll file a lawsuit against the university and your company. And when that happens, the podcast will be the proof," Fabian concluded, finally understanding Helena's plan. "She's not just telling stories. She's building a public case." Marcus nodded gravely. "The question is, whose side? Will you be on when the truth comes out?" Fabian stood up, his decision already made. "I need your help, Marcus. We have to find Helena before Vanessa finds out what's going on, because when this story blows up, it's going to change everything," Marcus added, grabbing his coat. "And knowing Vanessa, she's not going to take it lying down." Vanessa gazed out at the city from her penthouse window, a glass of red wine in her perfectly manicured hands. The reflection in the glass showed a successful woman, a 35-year-old CFO, engaged to one of the capital's most influential businessmen, respected in the financial market. but her eyes revealed a growing uneasiness. His cell phone vibrated on the coffee table. It was a message from his contact in the university's IT department. "Someone has been digging through old server logs. We need to talk urgently." She ran her fingers through her dark hair, trying to maintain her composure. Years of meticulous planning couldn't fall apart now, not when she was so close to her ultimate goal. The sound of the elevator announced Fabian's arrival. Vanessa quickly deleted the message and forced a smile. "Honey, I thought I had a meeting until—" Her words trailed off as she saw the expression on his face. Fabian was carrying a folder of documents, and his eyes were different, knowing. "We need to talk," he said, his voice controlled but thick with tension. "About Helena." Vanessa kept her expression neutral, years of practice in hiding her true emotions being put to the test. "What about her? Are you pregnant, Vanessa?" The question took her by surprise. She had been building the narrative of her pregnancy for months, using it as yet another form of control over Fabian. "Why ask this question now?" "Because," Fabian began, opening the folder he was carrying, "I found your medical records, the real ones. You can't have children, Vanessa. You never could." The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa placed her wine glass on the table with calculated care, her brain quickly processing her options. "Who gave you these documents?" she asked, her voice now cold as ice. "Does it matter? What matters is that you lied about this, about Helena, about everything." Vanessa laughed, the sound humorless. "You don't get it, do you? You never did. Everything I did was to protect our interests." "Our interests?" Fabian threw more documents on the table. "You call it our interests to secretly negotiate. The sale of my company, to destroy an innocent woman's career, to hack emails, to forge documents." "She was a threat," Vanessa hissed, her mask of control finally cracking. "An idealistic college professor who believed in social justice and corporate ethics. How long before she started questioning our offshore operations, our deals? With politicians? The overpriced contracts?" Fabian stared at her as if he was seeing her for the first time. "So that's it? You destroyed Helena because she might discover your wrongdoings?" "Our irregularities, dear," Vanessa corrected, a cold smile on her lips. "Or do you think your hands are clean? Who signed all those contracts? Who approved all those transfers?" Fabian felt the weight of guilt on his shoulders. She was right. He had become an accomplice, even if by omission. "But you know what? Your biggest mistake was," Vanessa continued, pouring herself more wine, "that last night with her 9 months ago." Fabian froze. How do I know?" "Darling, I know everything. I always have. Why do you think I tried so hard to keep Helena away? She's pregnant with your child, Fabian. And that baby, well, it could complicate our plans a lot." "What plans?" Vanessa pulled out her tablet and showed him a series of documents. "Muller. Enterprises is worth much more when split into parts. The international buyers are already lined up. We'll sign the sales contracts within a week. You'll get a small percentage, of course, just enough to keep up appearances, and you take operational control," Fabian added, the pieces finally falling into place. "That's why you needed to keep me isolated, without Helena, without friends, without anyone who could alert me." The sound of a notification interrupted the conversation. It was Vanessa's phone. She looked at the screen and her face lost all color. "What's wrong?" Fabian asked. "Nothing," she replied quickly, but he was quicker, managing to see the title of the notification. "Silenced Voices. New episode. The executive who sold her soul." "Helena," Vanessa murmured, her composure finally crumbling. She knows everything." Fabian picked up his own phone and opened the podcast. Helena's digitally altered voice filled the room. "Today, I'm going to tell you the story of a woman who built her empire on lies, an executive who didn't hesitate to destroy lives to achieve her goals. But every lie has an expiration date." Vanessa stepped forward to grab the phone, but Fabian stepped back. "It's over, Vanessa. The game is over." "Is it over?" She laughed, a hysterical sound. "You don't get it, do you? Nothing ever ends. Not for people like me. And as for Helena, Well, accidents happen every day with delivery drivers, don't they? The veiled threat made Fabian's blood run cold. He needed to find Helena before Vanessa put whatever plan she was hatching into action. Time was running out. Helena adjusted. The microphone in her small makeshift studio, set up in Marcus's office at the university. Her hands shook slightly as she reread her notes for the next episode of the podcast. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Marcus asked, watching her with concern. "Exposing Vanessa like this, she's dangerous, Helena." "That's exactly why I need to do this," she replied, stroking her prominent belly. "It's not just about me anymore, Marcus. It's about all the other women she's harmed, about all the lives she's destroyed." The professor sighed, adjusting his glasses. "The documents we've obtained are explosive. The irregular transfers, the fraudulent contracts, the corporate espionage scheme, and the other women are ready to testify," Helena added. 10 executives, all with similar stories. Vanessa sabotaged them, stole their projects, destroyed their careers. Marcus walked over to the window, watching the movement on campus. "I got a message from Fabian. He found out all about her fake pregnancy." Helena stopped typing, her hands resting protectively on her belly. "What about the baby?" "I don't know. But Helena, he's looking for you. Maybe it's time to—" "No," she interrupted him firmly. "Not yet. First, we need to make sure the whole truth comes out. The court case will be filed tomorrow. After that—" His phone vibrated. It was a message from one of the delivery women he had met over the past few months. "Helena, there's a woman offering money to find your delivery route. She's tall, dark-haired, very elegant." "Vanessa," Helena murmured, feeling a shiver run down her spine. "You can't make any more deliveries," Marcus said, grabbing his car keys. "I'm taking you somewhere safe." "No need," Helena replied determinedly. "I have a better idea." She grabbed her phone and opened the delivery app, starting to type a message to all the delivery women in her network. In just a few months of working on the streets, Helena had built a support network among women who, like her, cycled around the city. "What are you doing?" "Creating a distraction," she replied, a small smile playing on her lips. "Vanessa wants to play cat and mouse? Great. But this time I'm the one who rules." Within minutes, dozens of delivery women responded to her message. All of them were wearing the same model of thermal backpack, all of them cycling along specific routes around the city. A dozen Helenas, confusing anyone who tried to track her. "While Vanessa wastes time looking for me on the streets," Helena explained, "I'm going to finish recording the most important episode of the podcast. The one that will expose her entire scheme." Marcus watched in amazement as his former rival had transformed. The fragile, devastated woman from the day she was fired had given way to a resilient, determined strategist. "You know what's ironic?" Helena continued, preparing to record. "Vanessa tried to silence me, to make me invisible. But that was exactly what gave me the greatest weapon against her, because when you become invisible to society, you can see things people try to hide," Marcus added, understanding. Helena nodded, putting on her headphones. "Exactly. And now it's time to give voice to all the stories she tried to bury." Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Fabian was racing against time. His driver drove through the streets of the capital, passing by each location where Helena usually made deliveries. But all he saw were dozens of delivery women with identical backpacks, all seemingly following a coordinated pattern. His cell phone rang. It was Marcus. "Fabian, I found Helena. She's safe. But there's something you need to hear, something that will change everything." "I'm on my way," he replied, directing the driver to the university. On the horizon, the sun was beginning to set over the capital, painting the sky orange. In a few hours, the new episode of the podcast would air, and nothing would ever be the same again. The makeshift studio in Marcus's office had become a fortress of truths ready to be revealed. Helena adjusted the last details of the equipment, while a dozen women occupied the space. Executives, teachers, professionals from various fields, all with a story to tell. "Are you all sure about this?" Helena asked, looking at each of them. In turn, "Once this episode airs, there's no going back." Marina, a former marketing director at a multinational company, went one step further. I spent 3 years thinking I was crazy, that I had imagined all the sabotage, the altered emails, the last-minute meetings cancelled. I lost my position on the board after I questioned some suspicious transfers, Clara added, her eyes shining with determination. Vanessa offered me a deal, silence in exchange for a letter of recommendation. One by one, the women shared their stories. Patterns emerged, connecting the dots in a web of manipulation that had stretched back years. Helena scanned documents, organized testimonies, building not just a podcast episode but an irrefutable legal case. The lawsuit will be filed tomorrow at 9 a.m., Helena explained, showing a stack of documents. As soon as the judge receives it, we will air the special episode. Vanessa won't have time to react legally before the truth comes out. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made everyone freeze. Marcus, who was standing guard at the door, relaxed as he recognized Fabian. He's alone, the professor confirmed, letting Fabian in. The businessman paused in the doorway, taking in the scene before him. His gaze met Helena's, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. She was different, not just because of her advanced pregnancy, but because of an inner strength that radiated from her eyes. "You should hear this," Helena said, pressing play on a recording. Vanessa's voice filled the room. "The plan is simple. We take operational control, split the company into 5 parts, and sell them to different buyers. Fabian gets minority shares in each, with no decision-making power. In 6 months, we implement the mass layoffs we planned." "When was that?" Fabian asked, his voice hoarse. "Yesterday," Helena replied. "Your office has been bugged for months. It's all part of her plan to maintain total control." Fabian approached the table where the documents were spread out. Contracts, emails, bank records, a story of ambition and betrayal told in paper and ink. "The baby," he began, looking at Helena's belly. "It's yours," she confirmed softly. "I found out a week after that night. I tried to tell you, but—" Vanessa intercepted all attempts at contact, Marcus added. She had full access to Fabian's communication systems. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the soft sound of the recording equipment. Helena stood up carefully, one hand resting on her stomach. "I'm not doing this for revenge," she said, looking directly at Fabian. "I'm doing it because there are dozens of other women out there who have been silenced, who have lost their dreams, their careers, their confidence. Someone needs to give them a voice." Fabian took a step towards her, but stopped when he saw her determined expression. "How can I help?" "By testifying," Helena replied. "Not just in the trial, but here, now, on the podcast. People need to hear her side of the story, to understand how someone like Vanessa can manipulate even those close to her." At that moment, Marcus's cell phone rang. It was an urgent message from Sandra, the former secretary. "Vanessa is at university. She is not alone." Helena quickly sat down at the microphone. "We don't have much time. We need to record now." The women took their positions, each with their own microphone. Fabian pulled up a chair and sat next to Helena. In the hallway, Marcus and 2 university security guards stood guard. "Ready?" Helena asked, her fingers hovering over the record button. "Today we're going to tell not just one story, but many. Stories of women who refused to remain silent." The red light on the equipment came on, and the long-buried truths began to emerge, one voice at a time. In the hallway, footsteps approached, but now it was too late to stop what was about to happen. The truth, like a force of nature, could no longer be contained. The sound of Vanessa's heels echoed through the empty hallways of the university. Beside her, 2 men in suits carried briefcases, corporate lawyers ready to try to legally block any revelations. "Miss Vanessa," one of them called out, "technically, we can't stop you from recording. It would be a violation of freedom of speech." "I don't care about the technicalities," she snapped, her face a mask of controlled fury. "Find a way." As they turned the corner, they found Marcus blocking the door to his office. The professor was surprisingly calm, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "This is private university property," he said. "You are not allowed to be here outside of office hours." Vanessa laughed, the sound humorless. Interesting you should mention authorization, Professor, especially considering you're harboring a former employee who was fired for misconduct. Inside the office, the recording continued. One by one, the women shared their stories, building a mosaic of long-suppressed truths. My name is Paulina. Sorel, a voice said. I was the director of operations until I questioned certain international transfers. Within 2 weeks, I was accused of leaking confidential information. Vanessa recognized the voice, and her face paled slightly. She signaled to one of the lawyers, who began typing something on his tablet. We are preparing an emergency injunction, he explained. We may allege damage to corporate reputation. A wail of sirens interrupted his speech. Federal police cars parked on campus, their lights reflecting off the building's windows. What is this? Vanessa demanded. Oh, I forgot to mention, Marcus said, a small smile playing on his lips. We invited some special listeners to this recording. 2 federal agents approached, flashing their badges. Ms. Vanessa Montero, we have a warrant to seize documents related to possible financial and corporate crimes. Inside the office, Helena continued recording, her voice steady despite the commotion outside. Fabian held her hand, offering silent support as she narrated. The hardest part, her own story. When I found out I was pregnant, she said into the microphone, I realized I wasn't just fighting for myself. Every woman in this room represents hundreds of others who have been silenced, who have lost their dreams because they dared to question, dared to speak out. In the hallway, Vanessa watched as her lawyers were led away by federal agents. Her hands shook slightly as she checked her phone. Notifications were exploding on the screen. The previous episode of the podcast, with the first revelations about her international operations, was already going viral on social media. You don't understand, she said, her voice losing its usual composure. I built all of this. Every contract, every negotiation. I turned Mueller Enterprises into a powerhouse. At the cost of how many lives? Marcus asked calmly. The office door opened. Helena emerged, supported by Fabian, followed by the other women. Each carried a folder of documents, copies of all the evidence they had gathered. It's over, Vanessa, Helena said, her voice carrying not anger, but a kind of sad understanding. You may have built an empire, but you did it on a foundation of lies and broken lives. Vanessa took a step toward Helena, but the federal agents restrained her. Her gaze met Fabian's, a final attempt at manipulation. You will lose everything, she threatened. When I reveal everything I know about the company's operations, it's all out in the open, Fabian interrupted, his voice firm. Every document, every suspicious transaction, the difference is that now it will be used to help the people you've harmed, not for blackmail. The officers began escorting Vanessa out of the building. Her last look at the group was a mixture of hatred and disbelief, the expression of someone who, for the first time, had completely lost control of the narrative. Helena watched his departure with a complex mix of emotions. Years of manipulation and suffering were coming to an end, but there was no joy in his victory, only the certainty that doing the right thing, no matter how difficult, was the only possible way. Let's finish recording, she said, heading back to the office. We still have a story to finish. The other women followed her, each carrying not just documents, but the weight and liberation of their truths finally revealed. The night had barely begun, and with it, a new story was about to be written. The next morning dawned with the capital in an uproar. Social media was buzzing with the episode of Voces Silenciadas. Hashtags related to the case dominated the trending topics, shared thousands of times. The story of Helena and the other women had touched a raw nerve in society. In the university's main auditorium, an impromptu press conference gathered dozens of journalists. Helena, still exhausted from the previous night's events, watched the movement behind the scenes, one hand instinctively resting on her belly. You don't have to do this now, Marcus said, concerned about her condition. We can postpone it. Give you some time to rest. No, she replied, determined. This moment is not about me. It's about all the other women who are still stuck in similar situations, not knowing that they can fight back. On stage, the other women who had participated in the recording began to tell their stories, now without digital alteration of their voices, their faces finally visible to the world. Each testimony caused a buzz in the audience, flashes going off incessantly. Fabian watched everything from a discreet corner, his face a mask of contradictory emotions. Beside him, Sandra, the former secretary, held a folder with even more documents. "We found this in Vanessa's personnel files," she whispered. Apparently, it wasn't the first time she'd done something like this. There are records of similar cases at other companies where she's worked. "A pattern of behavior," Fabian muttered, flipping through the papers. "Every promotion she's gotten has been built on someone else's downfall." On stage, Marina, the former marketing director, shared how she had rebuilt her career after it was sabotaged. "The hardest part wasn't losing my job," she said, her voice breaking. "It was losing my confidence in myself, questioning every decision, every intuition." A growing buzz caught everyone's attention. At the entrance to the auditorium, a group of women arrived. They were delivery drivers, still wearing their thermal backpacks. Those who had helped Helena during her most difficult months came to offer their support. "You taught us that every voice matters," one of them said, approaching Helena backstage, "that even by delivering food, we can make a difference." Helena hugged each of them, silent tears streaming down her face. In just a few months, she had built a network of solidarity that transcended social classes and academic titles. "Mrs. Helena," another delivery woman called, "you're going to go back to teaching, aren't you?" "My daughter always wanted to study literature." Before Helena could respond, the university president approached the group. His face was grave, but there was something different about his posture. Institutional pride had given way to a newfound humility. "Professor Helena," he began, clearing his throat uncomfortably. "On behalf of the university, I would like to, formally offer you your old positions back, with a promotion to head of the department, of course." An expectant silence fell over the group. Helena looked at Marcus, who nodded subtly, then at Fabian, who maintained a neutral expression, respecting her autonomy in the decision. "I appreciate the offer, Dean," she finally replied. "But I think we've all learned that sometimes we need to build something new, not just recover what we've lost." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I have a counter-proposal. Rather than simply returning to the department, I would like to create a new think tank, a space dedicated to researching and combating institutional harassment and professional sabotage." The dean blinked in surprise. "That would require a considerable investment." "Which I will fund," Fabian interrupted, stepping forward. "As part of the restructuring of Muller Enterprises, we will create a specific foundation for this." Helena looked at him, surprised. It was the first time he had spoken publicly since the events of the previous night. "Not out of guilt or compensation," he continued, now addressing Helena directly, "but because it's the right thing to do, because other women need to have the chance you almost lost." On stage, Clara ended her testimony. "Today is not about revenge or individual justice. It is about transforming pain into change, silence into voice." Helena took a deep breath, preparing herself for her moment at the microphone. The last 24 hours had changed everything, but somehow she felt like the real journey was just beginning. The baby moved in her belly as if in agreement. "It's time," Marcus said softly, offering his arm to support her. As she walked to the stage, Helena realized that she carried with her not only her own story, but the hope of countless other women. For transformation. Silenced voices had begun as a solitary cry of resistance, but now it was becoming a powerful chorus of change. Autumn in São Paulo painted the trees on the university campus with shades of red and gold when the Center for Studies on Justice and Institutional Equity opened. 3 months had passed since the explosive revelation of the podcast, and the corporate world was still reverberating with its shockwaves. Helena watched the final preparations for the inauguration ceremony of her office in the new building. A discreet sign on the door read, "Professor Dr. Helena Sorel, Coordinator," Beside her, a picture framed the first page of the process that had changed everything. "The research room furniture will arrive tomorrow," Marcus said, walking in with a stack of documents. "And we already have over 100 registrations for the first course on institutional harassment." Helena smiled, caressing her belly now in the last days of pregnancy. "I never imagined we would come so far in such a short time." "You underestimate the power of a good story," he replied, arranging the papers on his desk. "Especially a true story." The center was no longer just an academic space. In recent months, it had become a meeting place for women from all walks of life seeking guidance and support. The podcast Voces Silenciadas continued now as an official project of the center, giving voice to stories that needed to be heard. "Helena?" a familiar voice called from the doorway. It was Fabian carrying a carved wooden box. "Come in," she said, adjusting herself in her chair. Marcus quietly left the room, leaving them alone. "I brought something that belonged to my grandmother," Fabian explained, placing the box on the table. Inside was a set of letters yellowed with age. She was also a university professor in the 1950s. I found these letters where she documented the difficulties she faced, the barriers she had to overcome. Helena picked up the letters carefully, feeling the weight of the story in her hands. "This belongs in the center's collection now. Let's make sure your story is heard too." Fabian nodded, then hesitated before continuing. "About the company. The restructuring is almost complete. We are undoing all the irregular contracts that Vanessa had prepared." "What about the employees who were harmed?" "They are all being reinstated, with retroactive compensation," he replied. "Marina has taken over as CFO. Clara has returned to operations. We are also implementing a mentoring program for women in leadership roles." A comfortable silence fell between them, filled only by the distant sound of students on campus. It was strange how fate had woven their paths together, ex-husband and ex-wife, now united by a cause greater than their personal histories. "Have you chosen a name yet?" Fabian asked softly, looking at Helena's belly. "Aurora," she replied, smiling, "because she will be the birth of a new dawn, not just for us, but for all the women this center will help." A knock on the door interrupted the conversation. It was one of the delivery women who had helped Helena during her difficult months. "Teacher," she said shyly, "I brought my daughter. She wants to enroll in the preparatory course that the center is offering." Helena motioned for them to come. The young woman, no more than 17 years old, nervously clutched a notebook to her chest. "What's your dream?" Helena asked gently. "I want to be a lawyer," the girl replied, her eyes shining. "To defend people who have no voice." Fabian watched the scene in silence, realizing how a single decision, whether to destroy or rebuild, could affect future generations. He thought about his unborn daughter, what kind of world she would find. "You know," Helena said to the young woman, "sometimes we lose our voice not because we are weak, but because others are afraid of what we might say. The important thing is to never give up on finding it again." The afternoon sun streamed through the office windows, illuminating the shelves already filled with books and documents, testimonies from other women who, like Helena, had found the strength to retell their stories. The center was not just a space for denunciation or resistance. It was a place of reconstruction, of transformation, a reminder that sometimes you have to lose everything to find your true calling. Helena picked up an application form for the young aspiring lawyer. As she filled in the information, she felt Aurora move, as if she wanted to be part of this moment. 2. In a few days, her daughter would be born into a world that, although still imperfect, was a little more aware, a little more fair. And that, Helena thought, was just the beginning. The waiting room at the capital's premium hospital was silent that morning when Helena went into labor, 2 weeks early. Marcus, who had rushed her in, paced nervously back and forth while Fabian arrived out of breath, still wearing the suit from the last meeting of the day. "How is she?" he asked the head nurse, who was consulting a digital clipboard. "Labor has started, but we've detected some complications," the professional replied, her face taking on a worried expression. "Her blood pressure is unstable, and the baby's heartbeat is showing some changes." Fabian felt his blood run cold. Through the glass of the observation room, he could see Helena breathing heavily, while a medical team moved around her. "Mr. Muller," one of the doctors called, leaving the room. "We need to talk about a delicate situation." The doctor led them to a private room where charts and scans were projected on the wall. "The baby is showing signs of a rare genetic condition that affects the immune system. We will need a bone marrow transplant shortly after birth." "Transplant?" Fabian repeated, stunned. "But how?" "Genetic compatibility is crucial in these cases," the doctor continued. "We need to start searching for compatible donors immediately. Immediate family members are always the first option." Marcus, who had been following the conversation in silence, placed a hand on Fabian's shoulder. "There's something you need to know," he said hesitantly. "During our investigation into Vanessa, we discovered some information about her past." Fabian looked at his friend, confused. "What kind of information?" "You have a daughter," Marcus revealed. "From a previous relationship 20 years ago, Vanessa found out and kept the information hidden, using it as yet another form of control." The world seemed to spin around Fabian. Memories of a brief relationship during his youth flooded his mind. How did you find out?" "Among the documents Vanessa kept was a complete dossier about your life. She investigated every detail of your past before she even started working at the company. Your daughter's mother tried to contact you several times over the years, but Vanessa intercepted every attempt." A nurse rushed into the room. "Dr. Garcia, the patient is ready for emergency C-section." The doctor stood up. "Mr. Muller, we need your authorization to begin the procedures." "And what about the transplant?" "I'll take care of it," Marcus interrupted. "I have your daughter's contact information, Fabian. She's a resident doctor, works at a hospital in the countryside. Her name is Laura." Fabian staggered to a chair, overwhelmed by the avalanche of revelations. A daughter who could save his other daughter who was about to be born. Fate had a peculiar sense of irony. "Go stay with Helena," Marcus said. "I'll call Laura right now." In the operating room, Helena was conscious but sedated. Her eyes met Fabian's when he entered, already dressed. "Something's wrong," she whispered, her hands protectively over her belly. "I can feel it." Fabian held her hand, trying to convey a calm he didn't feel. "It's going to be okay. Our daughter is strong, like her mother." "Aurora," Helena murmured, as the anesthesia began to take effect. "Promise me you'll take care of her no matter what." "We'll take care of her," he corrected. "Together." The medical team began the procedure, and Fabian stood by Helena's side, whispering words of encouragement. Behind surgical masks, the doctors exchanged worried glances as they monitored the baby's vital signs. In the hallway, Marcus was finishing a phone call, his face lit with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Laura, Fabian's long-unknown daughter, was on her way. The young doctor, upon hearing the story, did not hesitate for a second. "I'll be there in 2 hours," were his exact words. The high-pitched sound of the heart monitor echoed through the operating room, marking the beating of 3 hearts intertwined by fate: Helena, Aurora, and somewhere down the dark road, Laura, driving toward a father she never knew and a sister who desperately needed. Her fate, which had separated so many lives through Vanessa's manipulations, now seemed intent on reuniting them in the most unexpected way possible. Laura Martins parked her car at the hospital exactly 2 hours and 7 minutes after Marcus called. At 25, she carried in her brown eyes the same determination that Fabian demonstrated in crucial moments, a similarity that no one had noticed until then. "Dr. Andreu?" she called, approaching the professor who was waiting for her. In the lobby, her voice betrayed only a slight tremor, the only indication of the emotional storm that was consuming her inside. "Laura," Marcus greeted her, immediately noticing the traits she shared with Fabian. "Thank you for coming so quickly. How is the baby?" she asked, already assuming her professional doctor's posture. "I need to know exactly what the condition is for." A scream from the operating room interrupted their speech. The two ran towards the sound, only to be stopped by a nurse. "Aurora was born," the professional informed, "but we need to stabilize her immediately." The mother also has some complications. Laura took a deep breath, her years of medical training kicking in. I'm a doctor and a possible compatible donor. I need to speak to the team in charge now. As Laura was led into the operating room, Marcus found Fabian in the hallway, his face pale and drawn. She's here, Marcus said softly. Your eldest daughter. Fabian nodded, unable to form words. Through the glass of the neonatal ICU, he watched Aurora, so small and fragile, connected to several monitors. Helena had been taken to recovery, still unconscious after the complicated C-section. Mr. Muller? A female voice called behind him. Fabian turned around and his heart stopped for a moment. Laura was the image of his mother when she was young, the same expressive eyes, the same shape of her face. How had he not noticed before? How had he allowed Vanessa to keep him away from his own daughter for so long? Laura, he managed to say, his voice cracking. I didn't know. I know, she replied, keeping a professional distance. But now is not the time for that conversation. I've already spoken to the medical team. I'm a match for Aurora. The transplant can happen as soon as she's strong enough. Laura's clinical objectivity was her way of dealing with the surreal situation. In less than 3 hours, she had discovered a father she had never known and a sister who needed her to survive. How is Helena? Marcus asked, breaking the tense silence. Stable, Laura replied, consulting the digital medical record. Her blood pressure is returning to normal, but we'll keep her under observation for the next 24 hours. A nurse hurried out of the neonatal ICU. Dr. Martins, Aurora's vital signs are improving. Laura smiled for the first time since her arrival, a smile that Fabian knew well, as it was the same one he saw in the mirror. She's a fighter, he commented, before following the nurse into the ICU. Fabian watched his eldest daughter approach the incubator, where her youngest daughter was fighting for her life. Laura began to examine the monitors with the skill of someone who had spent years preparing for moments like this, unaware that her first big case would be saving her own sister. It's amazing how life turns around, Marcus commented, watching the scene. Vanessa tried so hard to keep people apart, and in the end, blood speaks louder, Fabian added, realizing the irony of the situation. The same blood that ran through Laura's veins, the blood she now offered to save Aurora, was the most concrete proof of the bonds Vanessa had tried to deny. In the recovery room, Helena was beginning to wake up from the anesthesia. Her first thoughts were of Aurora, but when she opened her eyes, she found a photograph on her bedside table, a young doctor smiling at her graduation. I thought you might like to meet our daughter's savior, the nurse said, noticing his questioning. Look, it's Dr. Laura Martins, and they say she's Fabian's daughter, Helena added, a soft smile forming on her lips. I know. Some stories need time to be told properly. Outside the hospital, the sun was beginning to rise over the capital, its first golden light streaming through the windows of the neonatal ICU, where two sisters, a dedicated doctor, and a struggling newborn, met for the first time, united by bonds stronger than time or distance. 2 weeks after Aurora was born, the hospital room had become a quirky family gathering place. Helena, now recovered from surgery, sat in a comfortable chair, watching Laura examine Aurora with a care that went beyond professional. The results of the latest tests are promising, Laura explained, gently adjusting the small woolen hat on her sister's head. We can perform the transplant in 3 days. Helena studied the young doctor's face, noticing the similarities with Fabian that became more evident every day. You have the same restless eyes as him, she commented softly, always attentive to everything. Laura blushed slightly, still adjusting to these observations about their family similarities. My mother used to say that I inherited his stubbornness, even without knowing him. How is she dealing with all this? Helena asked, genuinely interested in the woman who had raised Laura alone. Surprised mostly, Laura replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. But relieved to finally understand why her attempts to contact us were never answered. Vanessa was thorough in her separation work. Vanessa's name hung in the air like a dark cloud, but unlike in previous weeks, it no longer carried the same weight. The former executive was awaiting trial, and her actions, while still painful, had inadvertently created new ties. "You know," Laura continued, adjusting Aurora's heart monitor, "during medical school, I used to shadow the work of the Muller Research Center. Ironically, I almost did my residency at one of their hospitals." Helena smiled, realizing the intricate webs of fate. "And now you will help create a new research department at the Center for the Study of Justice and Equity. If you still want a stubborn resident doctor on your team," Laura joked. "I want a brilliant researcher who understands firsthand the importance of giving a voice to the silenced," Helena corrected. The bedroom door opened, and Fabian walked in, carrying a stack of documents. He paused for a moment, watching his three wives, as he had taken to affectionately calling Helena, Aurora, and Laura, stand together. "The board has approved it," he announced. "The center's new medical research department will have full autonomy and guaranteed funding for 10 years. Laura stood up excitedly. "Does this mean we can start the program to help women in medically vulnerable situations?" "It means you can structure the department however you see fit," Fabian replied, still settling into his role as proud father. "I trust your professional judgment." Helena watched the interaction between father and daughter with a serene smile. Over the past 2 weeks, she had witnessed the shy blossoming of their relationship. Small gestures, shared glances, mutual discoveries of similar quirks and preferences. "I brought something else," Fabian said, pulling an envelope from the folder. "Aurora's registration has been updated. She now officially has 2 sisters on her documents." Laura looked at him surprised. "2? Remember when I asked for that additional DNA test?" Fabian explained. "We discovered that Vanessa had another daughter from her first marriage. She's currently living in London." The silence that followed was broken by the soft beeping of Aurora's monitors. Laura processed the information that she had not just one, but 2 sisters. "I've already made contact with her," Fabian continued. "Sophia is 22 years old. She's finishing law school. And, like you, she didn't know anything about the existence of other sisters." "Another voice that Vanessa tried to silence," Helena murmured, noticing how the circle of impact of the former executive's actions continued to expand. "Sophia wants to meet you," Fabian said. She said she always knew her mother was hiding something, but she never imagined it was a whole family." Laura approached the incubator where Aurora slept peacefully. "Well, little warrior, it seems you have a natural talent for bringing people together." Helena reached out, taking Fabian's hand. "Family isn't just blood," she said softly. "It's choice, it's care, it's being there when needed." "It's donating bone marrow to a sister you just found out you have," Laura added, smiling. At that moment, Aurora opened her eyes, the same restless eyes she shared with her father and older sister. As if feeling the weight of the moment, she let out a small yawn that made everyone laugh. "I think she's approving the changes," Helena joked. Outside the hospital, the capital continued its frenetic pace, oblivious to the small miracle of reconnection taking place in that room. But within those walls, a new story was being written, a story of redemption, of second chances, and of bonds that, once discovered, could no longer be denied. Guarulhos International Airport was especially busy that Thursday morning. Sophia nervously adjusted the strap of her bag as she passed through passport control, her green eyes, inherited from Vanessa, searching for faces she only knew from photos. Laura was the first to spot her. It was impossible not to notice the resemblance to Vanessa in her younger years, although Sophia's hesitant smile was much more genuine than her mother's calculated smiles. "Sophia," Laura called, approaching cautiously. The 2 sisters studied each other for a moment, noting their differences and similarities. Where Laura had her father's intense brown eyes, Sophia had her mother's piercing green. Where Sophia had Vanessa's straight dark hair, Laura had the unruly curls she had inherited from her own mother. "It's so weird," Sophia said, her voice breaking. "I spent years wondering if I had brothers somewhere, and now..." "Now, you have too," Laura added, opening her arms for a hug that her younger sister accepted immediately. Helena watched the scene from a discreet distance, Aurora sleeping peacefully in her stroller. Fabian was at her side, his hand intertwined with hers, both witnessing the moment when another piece of the family puzzle fell into place. "She's beautiful," Sophia whispered as she approached Aurora's stroller, her eyes brimming with tears. "May I?" Helena nodded, and Sophia leaned over to gently touch her younger sister's hand. Aurora opened her eyes sleepily, blinking at her new sister curiously. "The tests after the transplant are excellent," Laura said, instantly slipping into her role as doctor and protective older sister. "She's a real fighter." "Like all of us," Helena added softly. The group headed to the parking lot where Marcus was waiting for them. The professor, who had become a sort of step-uncle to the whole family, had insisted on preparing a welcome lunch for Sophia. "I brought something," Sophia said when they were all settled in the car. She took a flash drive out of her purse. "These are files from my mother's personal computer, things she never knew I had access to." Fabian looked at her in the rearview mirror. "You don't have to do this, Sophia. You don't have to prove anything. To us." "I'm not trying to prove anything," she replied, her voice firm. "I'm trying to make amends. These files, they contain evidence of other people she's harmed over the years, people who deserve the chance to have their stories heard." Helena and Laura exchanged meaningful glances. The Center for Justice and Equity Studies had found its newest collaborator. "You know," Sophia continued, "I'm finishing my international law degree. I've always wanted to work in restorative justice, but I never imagined it would start so close to home. The center is currently structuring a legal department," Helena said. "We need someone who understands not only the law, but also the human impact behind institutional injustices." Sophia smiled, the first truly relaxed smile since her arrival. "That would be perfect." The car stopped at a red light, and through the window, they could see the city that had witnessed so much drama in recent months. The capital continued its frenetic routine, but for that small group inside the vehicle, the world had completely changed. "It's funny," Laura said, breaking the contemplative silence. "Mom always said that family is like a patchwork quilt. Each piece has its own story, but together they form something new and beautiful. And sometimes," Helena added, "the scraps that look most different are the ones that create the most interesting patterns." Aurora chose that moment to let out one of her infectious laughs, as if she understood the metaphor perfectly. Everyone laughed along, the initial tension completely dissipated. "Welcome to our rather peculiar patchwork quilt," Fabian said, looking fondly at his newfound daughter in the rearview mirror. Sophia hugged the flash drive to her chest, feeling, for the first time in a long time, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. This wasn't just a family reunion. It was the beginning of something bigger, more meaningful. It was a chance to turn the shadows of the past into light for the future. The capital's criminal court had never been so crowded. The courtroom was filled with familiar and unfamiliar faces, all united by the desire to see justice served. Helena sat in the front row, Aurora sleeping peacefully on her lap, while Laura and Sophia occupied the seats beside her. Vanessa entered under escort, her impeccable suit contrasting with the paleness of her face. Her eyes scanned the room, stopping for a moment on Sophia, her daughter who now sat next to the people she had tried so hard to destroy. "All rise," the bailiff announced as the judge entered the room. The trial began with the presentation of the evidence, a mountain of documents, emails, recordings, and testimonies that painted a devastating picture of manipulation and abuse of power. But the most shocking moment was yet to come. "I now call Helena Sorrell to the stand," announced the prosecutor. Helena handed Aurora to Laura and walked to the front of the room. After taking the oath, she sat down and adjusted the microphone. "Professor Helena," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court about the Voces Silenciadas podcast." Helena took a deep breath before starting. "The podcast was born out of the need to give a voice to those who have been systematically silenced, not just by one person, but by a system that allows power and influence to stifle the truth." She continued, her voice gaining strength. "Each episode told a different story, but they all shared a common pattern: the use of institutional power to destroy careers, reputations, and lives. And how did you discover that you were not alone?" Through the streets, Helena replied, a small smile playing on her lips. When you become invisible to society, like I did working as a delivery girl, you start to see other invisible people. You start to hear their stories. At the defense table, Vanessa maintained her neutral expression, but her fingers drummed nervously on the table. You could have sued for just the personal injuries you suffered, the prosecutor noted. Why did you choose to expand the case? Because justice isn't about revenge, Helena replied, looking directly at Vanessa for the first time. It's about transformation. Every woman in this room today represents hundreds of others who haven't yet found their voice. This case isn't about one person. It's about changing a system that allows people like Vanessa to thrive at the expense of others. It was then that something unexpected happened. Sophia stood up from her seat. "Your Honor," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "I request permission to make a statement." The judge, after a brief consultation with the lawyers, nodded. Sophia walked to the front of the room, passing her mother without looking at her. "My name is Sophia Montero, and I am Vanessa Montero's daughter. For years I watched my mother build her empire through the destruction of others. I kept records, copied files, stored evidence, not for revenge, but because I knew that one day the truth would need to come out." Vanessa sat up straight in her chair, her eyes fixed on the daughter she had never imagined capable of such an act of rebellion. "The files I have given to the prosecution," Sophia continued, "show a pattern of behavior that spans decades. But today I'm not here just as a witness. I'm here as someone who has chosen to break the cycle of silence." Laura held Aurora, who had woken up and was watching the scene with her big, curious eyes. Fabian, sitting behind them, noticed how his three daughters, each in their own way, carried the same inner strength. "What do you hope will come out of this trial?" the judge asked Sophia. "Justice, Your Honor. Not just in the form of punishment, but in the form of reparations. Every person harmed by these actions deserves not just recognition, but the chance to rebuild what was taken from them." Helena watched, her stepdaughter with pride. The young woman who had arrived from London only a few weeks ago, carrying the weight of family secrets, now stood as a voice for change. The judge made some notes before addressing the courtroom. "This court will recess for 1 hour before closing arguments." As people began to stand up, Vanessa finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Why, Sophia?" Her daughter turned to her, years of hurt and determination in her eyes. "Because sometimes, Mommy, the greatest act of love is stopping someone from causing further harm." The afternoon sun streamed through the high windows of the courthouse, illuminating a room where long-buried truths were finally coming to light. And in the midst of it all, a small, newly formed family demonstrated that sometimes you have to lose everything to find something much more valuable: the truth of who you really are. 6 months after the trial, the Center for Institutional Justice and Equity Studies was bustling with activity. The old university building had been completely renovated, now housing not only classrooms and research, but also a state-of-the-art medical center coordinated by Laura and a legal department, led by Sophia. Helena walked through the halls, Aurora cuddled in her lap, observing the changes. The walls, previously austere, now displayed a photographic exhibition, portraits of women who had passed through the center, each with her own story of overcoming. "The new episode of the podcast already has over 100,000 views," Marcus said, reaching for her with a stack of documents. "The story of the judge who faced institutional harassment is resonating across the country." "And what about the applications for the mentoring program?" Helena asked, adjusting Aurora, who was playing with her necklace. "They tripled after Laura implemented free medical care," he replied, smiling. "Apparently, taking care of your physical and emotional health makes all the difference in professional recovery." They entered the new conference room, where Sophia was presenting the legal department's quarterly report. The young lawyer had blossomed in her role, transforming her intimate understanding of the mechanisms of power into tools for change. "We have secured 3 more reinstatements this month," she announced to her team, "and most importantly, the companies involved have agreed to implement programs to prevent institutional harassment." Laura, who had just entered. The room, still wearing her lab coat, added, "The psychological counseling program we developed is being adopted as a model in 3 university hospitals." Helena watched her stepdaughters with pride. Each had found her own way to contribute to the transformation that the center represented. Aurora, sensing the positive energy in the room, let out one of her infectious laughs. "Speaking of transformations," Sophia said, projecting a document on the screen, "the Silenced Voices Foundation was officially registered yesterday. With the value of the compensation from the lawsuit and the donations we received, we can expand the work to other cities." The foundation had been Fabian's idea, a way to ensure that the center's work continued independently of any institution. He himself had stepped back from direct management, understanding that his role was to support, not control. "And how is Vanessa?" someone in the room asked, breaking the brief silence that followed. Sophia adjusted her glasses before answering. "She started therapy last week. It's a first step." Vanessa's sentence had included not only legal restrictions, but also mandatory psychological treatment. It was an approach that reflected the center's philosophy, restorative rather than merely punitive justice. "Professor Helena," a young intern called, rushing into the room. "You need to see this." She projected a video on the screen, a news report about a national support network for professionals facing institutional harassment. The project, inspired by the center's work, was spreading across the country. "This is how change happens," Helena said emotionally. "One voice at a time, one story at a time." Laura approached, picking up Aurora. The little girl, now completely recovered thanks to the transplant, was the living symbol of how bonds can be rebuilt, how healing can come in the most unexpected ways. "You know what's amazing?" Sophia said, putting away her documents. "Every person who walks down that hallway, who sees those photos, who listens to the podcast, every single one of them becomes part of something bigger." "A network of voices," Marcus added, smiling. Helena looked out the window, watching the students walk across campus. How many of them carried untold stories? How many just needed a chance, a safe space to find their voice? Aurora chose that moment to reach out her arms toward her, and Helena took her back, feeling the sweet weight of her daughter. In her eyes she saw the same determined gleam she found in Laura and Sophia's eyes, the gleam of someone who knows her true worth. "Shall we start the meeting?" Helena suggested, sitting at the table with Aurora on her lap. "We have a lot of work ahead of us." The room quickly organized itself, each person taking their place. There, in that space built on painful but necessary truths, a new story continued to be written, no longer of silence and oppression, but of strength, unity, and transformation. The main auditorium of the capital's convention center was packed on that spring morning. Helena adjusted the microphone on her blazer as she surveyed the crowd that had gathered for the first international conference on restorative justice and institutional equity. Aurora, now a year and a half old, played peacefully on Laura's lap, who sat in the front row with Sophia. The two sisters had become inseparable over the past year, united not only by blood but by a shared commitment to social change. "Are you ready?" Marcus asked, approaching with a tablet. "The Live Eye Streamlink is now up and running. We have over 50,000 people connected from all over the world." Helena nodded, taking a deep breath. On the screen behind her, images of the center's work alternated, smiling faces, stories of overcoming, moments of transformation. A year of intense work had produced results that exceeded her most optimistic expectations. "With you," the presenter announced, the founder of the Silenced Voices movement and director of the Center for Studies on Justice and Institutional Equity, Professor Helena Sorel. Applause echoed through the auditorium as Helena walked to the podium. Aurora, recognizing her mother on stage, let out one of her characteristic laughs, breaking the initial tension. "Exactly a year and a half ago," Helena began, "I cycled through the streets of the capital, carrying not only deliveries but also the weight of imposed silence. Today, I stand before you not as a lone voice, but as part of a growing chorus of transformation." The lights in the auditorium dimmed gently, and numbers began to appear on the screen. More than 1,000 women served by the center, 300 successful professional reintegrations, 50 companies, participating in the cultural restructuring program. But we're not here to celebrate numbers, she continued. We're here to celebrate people, stories, lives that have been not just restored, but transformed. From the back of the auditorium, Fabian watched with quiet pride. After completely reorganizing Muller Enterprises, he had dedicated himself to implementing equity programs at other companies, using his influence to open doors that had previously been closed. The center, that began in a small borrowed room, Helena continued, is now an international network of support and transformation, but our work is far from over. Sophia stood up, taking her place next to Helena on the stage. As the center's legal coordinator, she had developed an innovative restorative justice protocol that was being adopted by courts across the country. Today, Sophia announced, we officially launched the International Mentoring and Training Program, a project that will take the center's methodology to 10 countries over the next 2 years. Laura joined them, Aurora still in her arms, representing the medical division of the center that had revolutionized care for victims of institutional harassment. Because we understand, Laura added, that true healing requires a holistic approach, physical, emotional, and social. Helena watched her stepdaughters with pride. Each had found her own way to contribute to the center's mission, bringing unique perspectives that enriched the work. But perhaps our greatest achievement, Helena continued, is not measured in numbers or programs. It is measured in smiles recovered, in dreams reborn, in voices that refuse to remain silenced. Testimonies began to appear on the screen. Women of different ages, professions, and backgrounds sharing their stories of transformation through the center. And that's why today we also announced the creation of the Aurora Fund, Helena revealed, looking lovingly at her daughter. A scholarship and financial support program for women who want to restart their careers after experiences of institutional harassment. The applause was interrupted by an unexpected moment. Aurora, as if understanding the importance of her name, extended her arms towards the audience and let out one of her infectious laughs. The entire audience laughed along, in a spontaneous demonstration of how joy and hope can be born even from the most difficult circumstances. Because this, Helena concluded, her voice thick with emotion, is a story that belongs to all of us. Every person in this room, every person connected online, every story yet untold, everyone is part of this transformation. Marcus, watching from the sidelines, smiled as he watched his former academic rival transform into an inspiring leader. The podcast that had begun as an act of resistance was now a global movement, proving that a single voice, when true and courageous, can start a quiet but profound revolution. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of the convention center, creating a kaleidoscope of colors over the stage. It was as if the universe itself conspired to illuminate this moment, not an ending, but a new beginning in an ongoing journey of transformation and hope. The afternoon was falling gently over the capital when Helena returned to the place where it all had begun, the busy avenue where, almost 2 years ago, Fabian had seen her cycling with her delivery backpack. Now she walked hand in hand with Aurora, who took hesitant but determined steps. The study center was quiet that evening, but the lights in Laura's office were still on. The doctor was finishing her last patient of the day, a young executive, who had finally found the courage to report years of harassment. Sophia appeared in the hallway, carrying a file box. "I found more of Mum's documents," she said, her voice calm. This time they're records of her first attempts at manipulation, early in her career. "And how are you dealing with it?" Helena asked gently. "Every document is a chance to help someone," Sophia replied. "That's how I choose to see things now." Aurora let go of Helena's hand and ran awkwardly toward her sisters, who greeted her with warm smiles. The sound of their laughter echoed through the halls of the center, a constant reminder of why they were there. Marcus emerged from his office, carrying a printed edition of the center's latest impact report. "I used have to see this," he said excitedly. The stories we're getting are extraordinary. Helena picked up the report, flipping through its pages. Each documented case was a testament to how a single voice, when amplified by solidarity and appropriate support, could catalyze profound change. You know what's interesting? Laura said, joining the group with her patient. Every person who walks through those doors isn't just someone seeking help. They're someone who's going to help other people later on. The young executive nodded, wiping away a discreet tear. I never imagined I would find so much strength here. Fabian arrived at that moment, carrying the latest documents from the Foundation's restructuring. His eyes met Helena's, and a silent understanding passed between them. They were no longer ex-husband and ex-wife, but partners in something much bigger than themselves. Aurora is almost asleep, he observed, noticing his youngest daughter yawning in Sophia's arms. Shall we go home? Helena suggested, and the naturalness with which the word home encompassed that entire unconventional family did not go unnoticed. As they walked to the parking lot, the sun already almost completely set on the horizon. Helena paused to look at the center building. The illuminated windows were like beacons in the growing night, signaling hope for those who needed to find their way. Sometimes, she said, we need to lose ourselves completely to find our true direction. Sophia took his hand on one side, Laura on the other, with Aurora sleepily in Fabian's arms. Marcus watched them with a smile, understanding that he had witnessed not only a story of overcoming, but the birth of something truly transformative. Tomorrow's podcast, Sophia reminded, is about new beginnings. Every day is about new beginnings, Helena replied, smiling. Every person who finds their voice is a new dawn. And so, under the darkening sky over the capital, that family built not by fate but by conscious and courageous choices went on its way. The center would remain there, its doors open to all the voices that needed to be heard, all the stories that needed to be told. Because some stories don't really have an ending. They keep echoing, transforming, inspiring. Like Aurora's laughter, which even now, almost asleep, gave one last soft chuckle, as if she knew she was part of something extraordinary.